Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about hurricane season. This year's hurricane season, what determines a hurricane, the type of damage that it can cause, how a hurricane forms, all that good stuff. So we are in hurricane season, if you weren't aware of that. So this is a great time to review all the different things that you can expect going into hurricane season. So let's start off with the first thing that pretty much everybody knows about, and that's the different categories of a hurricane that we can have. It ranges from 1 through 5. You can have winds as low as 74 miles per hour with a category 1, and it ranges all the way up to 157 plus miles per hour. So these can have some pretty damaging winds associated with it. And you can see here, this is the types of damage that can range with each category. And the higher up we go in category, you can see more catastrophic damage can be caused. So you might be wondering, why in the world have I not heard anything about hurricanes? I haven't seen anything on the news about hurricanes, anything like that. So that is because we are not even at the peak of hurricane season yet. So we are actually right here. We're at the very bottom of this steep incline, getting us up to the peak of hurricane season. The peak doesn't really happen until around early September. So we've got a little bit of time before we reach those peak months where we start to see the Atlantic a little bit more active. These are the names of the hurricanes in the Atlantic basin that we have this year. We can already scratch 3 off the list. We had Andrea, Barry, and Chantal. So once again, those are storms you probably didn't even hear about because they were either just junk storms or they didn't really cause a lot of issues or damage or anything like that. So we can be very thankful for that going into this hurricane season. But like I said, we're not even at the peak yet. So we have lots of names that we could go through the further on into hurricane season that we go. So now that leads us into the development of a tropical system. So you need a couple of ingredients in order to get all the way up to a hurricane, but it all starts with this: warm water over and moist air over that warm water. So you have this moist air mass that's sitting above this warm water. The temperature of that warm water has to be 80 degrees Fahrenheit in order for something to happen. So we've got that moist air, that warm water, and then we have this rising motion, this rising air that will form these clouds up above that moist air above the warm water. Now you can see, like I said, as that air begins to rise, it'll start to form those clouds above that moist air. And as that air continues to rise, we do start to see more storms form above this moist air. When we have that continuous rising motion, that is what aids in more thunderstorm development. So if this air continues to rise, we start to get this spinning motion. This very strong upward motion will cause air to flow in all different directions and give us this spinning motion around an area of low pressure. So that is when we have our tropical system start to form. However, if these ingredients become a lot more favorable, if the conditions are all right, that is when we start to get a tropical depression. So that is when storms just start to build up around that surface, the circulation. Very minimal impacts are caused by this depression, the tropical depression. We do see a lot of storms during hurricane season just form into tropical depressions, and that's really it. They cause, like I said, very minimal impacts. However, if conditions continue to be favorable and it has a lot more of opportunity to increase in its strength, we have a tropical storm. That is when that rising air continues to intensify, more storms start to build near the center, we have much stronger winds, much more damage with this type of storm. So tropical storm is what comes after a depression if the conditions are much more favorable to intensify that system. And then, of course, if this just keeps on going, if it keeps ramping up in activity, we have a hurricane. Now that is when we've got very strong rising air near the center. That is when the eye can start to form. Very dangerous winds can come out of a hurricane, and we can have very extensive damage with a hurricane as well. And then, of course, if that air just continues to rise, if we keep having that conditions are continuing to be favorable, that can become a major hurricane. And that is more of the category 3 through 5, where we start to see that much more extensive damage, more sustained winds of 115 plus miles per hour. So this is when things can get very, very violent. We had a couple of major hurricanes last year. You might remember we had Hurricane Beryl. We also had Hurricane Helene that caused a lot of devastation. So these can cause a lot of catastrophe, a lot of catastrophic damage associated with these storms. So that is everything you need to know going into hurricane season, how they form, what different types of categories we've got, all that good stuff. So, like I said, we're not even at the peak of hurricane season yet. We've got a good ways to go, but we can be thankful that we haven't had any sort of big name storm so far.